Today I'm talking with Nathalie. I won't even try and pronounce her last name because I get it wrong every time. And if you don't know who she is, she's one of the OG names in the remote sales space, but she's also one of, if not the original, to actually create a brand around being a remote salesperson. And that was what caught my attention 3 or 4 years ago now. And it was her witty content and her authentic approach to remote sales. And the story is an interesting one. She went from working retail in Canada to building a life where she can work anywhere. And she actually does. And if you followed her for a period of time before her accounts got shut down, you'll know that she's worked all over the world in the last few years, caught up with a bunch of different remote salespeople. But what I like about this conversation is it goes way beyond the usual, digital nomad talk. And we get into what it really means to break away from conventional paths, what most people expect of you, and why most people stay stuck, even when they're unhappy. But then what happens when you finally decide that you want to do things differently? It's genuine. It's an honest chat about creating a life on your terms. And I think you'll get a lot from it. You were doing everything that everyone says that you can do in the remote sales space, living where you want, doing what you want to do. Your content was always on. And I remember you would do all of these witty, funny posts that just stood out. And I remember thinking, how does she come up with all of these ideas? How does she do this? And how does she manage to live a life like that? And I think you were the goal for a lot of people that were getting into it. And obviously, your content game got a lot better over time before you lost your account.
Yeah, we don't want to talk about
But
that.
you're going around everywhere, just hopping around the world, doing remote sales, doing what you want to do. And the goal of this podcast is speak to people living on their own terms. And you are one of those people.
I love
You
it.
are.
I love that. I very much feel like I am. And I know that kind of sounds like it kind of sounds like a buzzword or like a buzz term now, like live life on your own terms and pave your own path. But I truly feel like that's when I started this whole thing, that really was what I was setting out to do. I really did want to kind of break away from the matrix. And so I very much feel like that is what I'm doing now. So I appreciate you saying that.
Mm. And a lot of people fall into the trap of just working 10, 12-hour days. They give up a 9 to 5 and then they pick up a 7 till 6.
Mhm.
And you've not done that. So how did you manage to, as a start point, did you at some point get pulled into that?
I very much did. I think, especially, I don't want to say that it's a gender thing, but I think that this space is very much dominated by a lot of men. And so when I started out in this industry, I was willing to put in the work. I knew that it was going to take a lot of time and effort, and I was working a lot. I will say I was totally that person that went from working a 9 to 5. I was taking hours at any time of the day that you needed me to take calls. I was taking them because I really wanted to sharpen that skill, and I knew that it was going to pay off. But also I was, really buying into the whole idea of you have to be a killer or a savage. Like these are the terms that were being used so often in our industry. And so
Yeah.
many people were just sharing about how stacked their calendars were and how busy they were. And they were like obsessed with learning skills and hopping on calls to role play. So I thought that I needed to really embody that in order to be successful. And so I did kind of fall into that trap for a little bit, and it paid off. I will say, I do think that there's also a level of, you do kind of have to like pay your dues, if you will, right? I think that a lot of times I will talk to new people who are coming into the industry, and that is really what they want because that is what I'm doing. I work very, very part time now, but I also think it's important to realize that you do have to work and put in a lot of time and effort to be able to reap those rewards, which I don't think that a lot of people talk about. So I
Mm.
was working, 7 to 9 hours, like back to back to back calls, and it was exhausting. And yeah, eventually got to the point where I realized, oh, I actually don't enjoy this as much anymore, or I just wanted to find a way to be a little bit more efficient with my time. And that's exactly what I did because I actually felt
Mm.
so much better finding that balance. And I realized that just because this is what's working for other people, and maybe they do want to work, and that is something that they find a lot of meaning and joy and purpose from working a lot of hours and building something. It just wasn't necessarily my story, and that was also okay. That I don't think that everyone goes into remote sales with the same outcome, and that's okay. I just don't think that a lot of people were talking about it at the time.
Mm. I was chatting to Eric yesterday, Eric Alvarez, about leverage. And I
Mm-hmm.
think what you said then, you worked hard in the beginning. And I talk a lot about not doing stupid hours because I don't want to do it anymore. It doesn't excite me. I don't enjoy it. But at the beginning, I well and truly did that. And even now, if you look at the amount of hours, I still do a solid amount of hours, but none of it feels like work. I don't
Mm-hmm.
take a heap of calls every day. Uh, but getting back to the leverage, you have to have skills to leverage in the first place. So I think if you come in thinking that, and it's not most people's fault, they see a YouTube video that says you're going to work 4 hours a day and make 30K a month or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
Expectations are mismanaged. Come in, work hard, build the skills that you can leverage, and then work on bigger and better things to sell. Like Hormozy says all the time, just sell the most expensive thing that you can sell. And you've kind of done that. You did the hard work and you did it all while traveling, working around, moving. And now you can work with the accounts that you want to work with and you don't have to do that amount of time because of the leverage.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. And I think it's just going back to, yeah, just being really efficient with your time, because busy doesn't always necessarily mean that you're being productive. Right. And I
Mm,
think that that's also something that a lot of people think of, like, oh, I'm going to fill up my time in my calendar. I'm going to be super busy. It's almost like people want to brag about how busy they are. To me, being busy is not really that much of a flex. I'm like, well, what are you actually spending your time on, and what is that really bringing you? So yeah, I just think it's a difference in perspective, and it's a perspective that's really evolved over time for me.
mm. I, the whole idea of being busy. I think a lot of people, again, over time, you can get to a point where you don't really have to do the things that you don't want to do. But in the beginning, you kind of have to, because those are the things that the uncomfortable things are the ones that are going to pay off the most, like your cold calling, like your outbound, like you're dealing with rejection, all of that sort of stuff.
Mhm.
Uh, but I'm to a point now, there are a lot of things that I don't like to do. There, I just don't enjoy. And I've realized I kind of don't have to do those things the majority of the time. If there's something that I really don't want to do, that's not going to help, I just don't do it. I'll either outsource it or figure out whether or not I need to do it. But I know a lot of people don't have that opportunity. They don't have that ability to not do it. And you're one of those people in that you don't have to do what you don't want to do. And you can
Yeah.
still live exactly as you want to do it. But was there a tipping point when you kind of realized I have a bit of freedom? I have a bit of autonomy. I can do what I want and I don't have to do that crazy work.
Yeah, honestly, I started traveling full time. It's been exactly 2 years. Actually, today's the 23rd. I left for Mexico October 28th, 2 years ago. So it's almost been 2 full years. But that was really the trip that changed everything for me, because I was still working really, really hard. And I've still worked. I don't want to say that I'm not working hard anymore, because I do feel like I am. But what I mean is, I was putting in a lot of time and effort. And I booked that trip with the sole intention of just spending the winter away from Canada, where I'm from. And that was really the trip that opened up my eyes to, okay, I just feel so much happier and better being here, being able to travel. I just felt just happier and lighter. And that's really, going back to your original point about leverage, that's really when I was like, I really feel like I could be more effective with my time and more efficient with my time. And I, implemented a couple of things on the whim on my offer, and they ended up just working out, thankfully. And that's really when I realized, okay, well, I don't have to work as hard anymore. I could probably peel back on the amount of hours, and not in like a bratty way, but I just knew that I could deliver results, and I had enough tenure in seniority in the industry that I could get away, for lack of a better term, I could get away with doing certain things and doing less, because the people that I was working with, or the accounts that I was on, they didn't want to lose me, and I knew that. I knew that they didn't want. So whatever they could do rather to keep me happy, they were going to do. So that was it for me. That was actually the first time that I went to Mexico for a few months. That's really when everything changed. That's when I realized that I didn't have to work as hard. I didn't have to work as long hours. I was pretty good at what I did, that I didn't have to work as long as I was. And yeah, that I could actually just negotiate a lot of different things with my accounts, and I was probably going to get my way.
Mm. I'm glad you added the not to sound bratty in there because anyone that knows you knows you're not bratty and there's an art to it. As in, these are the kind of things that I'd like. These are the reasons why. Let's find a way to make it work, as opposed to you must give me this or I
Yeah.
will leave.
Yes,
And there's
exactly.
an art to that, and I think most people really butcher that line.
Yes, 100%.
Mm.
I think that a lot of people in this industry, what I've experienced anyways, is a lot of entitlement. And I do think that because I very much, I share about a lifestyle, because for me, lifestyle design is why I got into sales. I didn't necessarily want to be working, create, for so many different reasons. But lifestyle design is definitely something, an idea that I now kind of promote, if you will. And a lot of people, they're being sold that dream. And I'm not saying that it's not possible. Obviously, I think you and I are both living proof that you can do that with sales. However, I do think that there's a lot of entitlement also in a lot of, to what you said, mismanaged expectations. They come in being like, well, I was told that I could make 50K a month, that I could work 2 hours a day. It's not really, that's probably not going to happen. Definitely not in your first couple of months, probably not in your first year. So,
And not in your first couple of years. And
mhm,
the one thing I say to people is, I know what the YouTube videos said, and I know what You Become a Closer Guru said. They lied. And you
mhm,
paid them 5 to 10K, and I get it, it sucks. And this can be great, but you need to look at what you can do with this in 2 to 5 years, as opposed to 2 to 5 weeks. And it does take longer to. I remember even looking for offers at the beginning. I came from corporate, I had all of this experience. I thought, "Ugh, I'm going to show up in this landscape and I'm going to have just a sea of offers in the next week."
mhm.
I had that entitlement and I got humbled hard, very, very hard by the industry. And I'm glad it happened. It made me get better. But it's not what it says on the box. It's not what's advertised. And we have to adapt to that. But you've mentioned lifestyle design a couple of times. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's this idea of, where you and I met, I believe it's through UCM, right? And something that we talk about often in there is, living a life by design, not default. And for me, I had to get really clear on, well, what is that, right? And it's this idea of freedom, yes, but for me, freedom has always meant options, just having options. I don't want to have to work long hours. I can if I want to. I just want that to be an option. I also want there to be an option to travel if I wanted, to have more time in my day if I wanted. So just having options, right? And
Mm,
so that's why I got into this space. I was really thinking about long term. I want to be able to travel. I want to be able to find a way to make money remotely. I wanted to, definitely make more than what I was making before, because I think, retail, it doesn't pay terrible, but it's a capped salary, right? Everything is capped. And so yeah, that to me was the first step, is just finding a way to work remotely, which I was able to do. But then I was working remotely from my little basement apartment, working 9 hours a day. So the next step from there was being able to work fully remote. And there was a period where I was working fully remote but still working long hours. And then I was just adding in layers of, every single year or every couple of months, I was just adding in a new layer. Like, okay, now I really only want to work part time. How can I work less and make more? Right. So that to me is what lifestyle design really is. It's really figuring out, well, what feels good for you? Like, what is the type of life that you want to have? Getting really clear on what it is that you want. Because I think so many people do get bogged down by this idea of, well, everyone is telling me that I need to be doing this, this, and this. Well, it's like, is that what you want? Because I feel like I've
mm,
always been very, very clear on, I just don't want to do that. And that's okay. Like, I feel like so many of the things that I have done have been a little bit against what a lot of the industry kind of quote unquote teaches you or portrays. But yeah, for me, sales was always just a stepping stone to be able to create something else. I gave myself a timeline, like, you're only going to do this for 3 years. So it's just knowing what you want out of life and then just kind of working your way towards that. And I have no shame in, working part time. I think that it's a beautiful thing. Definitely some weeks are lazier than others where I'm like not productive at all. Again, it's just going back to the idea. I just want to have the option. If I don't want to work a ton, I don't have to. And a lot of people don't have those
mm,
options. So I'm always very, very grateful that I do.
But what if someone doesn't have that clear idea of where they want in the next 3 to 5 years?
I
What would you
mean, I
say?
think that, yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of people don't necessarily know what it is that they want, because again, they're not clear on what what it is that they're actually looking for, right? For example, I think that a lot of people think that having a ton of money is what they're working towards, right? And not saying that money is a tool, right? And so again, for me, I thought that that was a goal that I needed to have when I started out in the industry. Everyone is talking about making your first 10 to 15K. So I was like, okay, I guess that's the first milestone that I'm working towards. And when you start making a lot of money, I realized, yes, it's great because it funds its lifestyle, but it's not necessarily a priority for me to get to 50, 60, 70K a month. It just wasn't, because I realized I'm actually happy working less and having a very balanced lifestyle and making enough to be able to fund a lifestyle. Like, I like nice things. I'm just going to say it. So, being able to do those, being able to have that was enough for me. But I think that a lot of people aren't clear. They're not asking themselves enough questions of like, well, what is it that I want? And, what is going to make me happy, right? And they're not exploring enough avenues. I don't think they're not consistent in any one thing to even see if it's something that could lead them to something else, if that makes sense. Most people start and stop and start and stop. And it's like, well, yeah, you're not really able to figure out what it is that you do want because you're not sticking to anything long enough to even
Mm.
see what could come of it, right? And that was, I can say that with confidence because that was me before I got into sales. And sales, I told myself, I was like, this is it. Like, you're going to actually give this a solid chance, a solid shot to actually see if this is, you're going to make this your plan A. And I sucked for the first year, was not making any money for the first year. So this is what I mean. It's like, you have to put in the time, but you have to believe so strongly that, okay, this is something that I actually really do see the potential in. And, you have to be dedicated enough and consistent enough with it long enough to actually see if it's something worth pursuing.
Mm. Mm. I speak to a lot of people that they say they don't know what their thing is. They
Yeah.
want to do something, but they just don't know what it is. And I just say, what have you tried? Nothing, but I think about a lot of things. And the advice that I give, and this is the advice I give to myself, just do more cool shit. That's it.
Mhm.
Just do things. Even if you're not sure whether or not it's going to work out, give it a try. And you might get 2 weeks in and think, no, I really don't want to do this. Or you might get 2 weeks in and think, this is actually a lot harder than I thought it would be, but I don't know where it's going to lead. And where I am, what I'm doing, if you'd asked me 5 years ago whether I thought I would be here, no, I wouldn't have said. I even a few years ago, I thought I was gearing up towards an early retirement. Within the next 4 years from now, I planned on just retiring.
Mhm.
I could not think of anything worse. That is so boring to me. And life on my terms changed from not having to work to not having to work on things that I don't want to do, but actually doing things that I do want to do. And I think the only reason that I'm figuring that out is because I've just done a lot of stuff and I've done a
Mhm.
lot of things that didn't work out. But I also realized that working towards something, working on things, being creative and growing things, that's what fills my cup. And I think that's why it comes back to not doing things that I don't want to do. I don't know. Maybe it's a little bit short-sighted. I don't think we have to do all of those things that we're told that we don't want to do, as long as we understand the kind of impacts. So I love working on things, growing things, scaling things, and never thought that's where I'd end up. But I think you've kind of found that position as well, and I think this season of life might be a little bit different to the next. I don't know. Maybe you'll always be the nomad, always on the road traveling, or maybe you will get a point where you put down some roots and see what that point of your life looks like. But you're doing a lot of things now, being exposed to a whole lot of different things
Mhm.
that will give you that idea for what comes next.
Yeah. Yeah. And I actually very much agree with that because I also think that people think that they have to be married to an idea or to a career path. And that's the thing too, is that I've realized that my priorities are going to shift and evolve as I, continue to shift and evolve. And so it doesn't have to be sales forever. The next thing that I do doesn't have to be the thing forever. You're allowed to change. And that's also okay. So I think that I used to be very much a planner and I still am. I like to kind of know things in advance and be as prepared as possible. But something I've really learned to release over the last couple of years is definitely not necessarily having a plan for everything because everything that I planned for when I was in my early 20s, none of it has happened. None of it has happened. I had this timeline so meticulous, right? I was like, this is going to happen by the time I'm 27. This is going to happen by the time I'm 29. And none of those things have happened. And I have found that the more that I release that, pressure that I put on myself, and the more that I just do cool things and explore and do things that really genuinely make me happy, that's really where I get more clarity on, okay, this is something I really enjoy. And being
Mm,
open to things looking different than you had planned in your 20s, like that's been really important for me. And just knowing, I don't necessarily need to I can have an overall desire of where I'd like to end up, like a general area, but it doesn't have to be super concrete. It's allowed to change. That's, I think also really, really important to realize.
mm. I heard a quote. Now, I don't know how accurate it is. I believe there's a version that's pretty close. It was by Richard Branson. And he was basically saying that you should go into your 30s just flat broke because the purpose
Mm-hmm.
of your 20s is to try everything, do everything under the sun, experiment, mess around, because that's the real testing ground for you in your life, where you want to go, who you want to be, what you want to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I had this conversation again a couple of days ago, that the idea of the 27 Club, which is kind of dark in its name, um, as essentially it explains a bunch of musicians and actors, actresses that have committed suicide at 27, and they seemingly have the world at their fingertips. They have everything that you could ever want, and yet they do that. And the whole idea of it, I don't know how old the concept is, but the whole idea that people hit 27 and all of a sudden they start to have these questions. And my 27th birthday, I'd bought a one-way ticket overseas. I was out. I didn't want to be what I was, where I was, doing what I was, working that life anymore. I hit that. And now I see a lot of people, they're doing the right thing. They get the job, the car, the house, all of that sort of stuff. And then a lot of my friends who are younger, um, the conversation that I've had with them when they've hit that 26, 27, they have all of that doubt on who am I? Where am I going? Is this the person that I want to be with? Is this the place that I want to be? And those questions are inevitable. And I think if you don't pay attention to, or at least follow curiosity, that is going to come to a head sooner or later. You can't skip that. And I think doing doing a whole lot of different stuff and putting yourself in different situations, I don't think it skips that conversation, but I think it makes it a lot easier. So instead of like, oh, I am a teacher here with this, it's, well, I've done all of these different things. I've had all of these different experiences. I've been to all of these different places. What actually do I enjoy? And I know I went off on a little bit of a tangent there, but I think the point I'm trying to make is that we have so much opportunity at our fingertips to experience and do and change and try. Uh, but taking that first step, breaking that mold, is probably the hardest.
Absolutely. And you know what I was going to ask you, because I think about this often. And so many people that I talk to, and I'm sure you have a lot of these conversations as well with people who are like, well, how do I do what you do? Right? How do I do what you do? And it's like, well, for me now, looking back, it's pretty simple, but I don't actually know what the moment was, because I was just having this conversation the other day. That's why it's fresh in my mind. But so many people, everyone that I know and everyone in my family has pursued a very traditional route. You go to school, then you go to school some more to get another degree, and you think that that's really going to advance you in your career, is having all these certifications and qualifications, and then you move up the corporate ladder, and everyone in my family is very, very is successful, right? And all of my friends have very traditional jobs and they're doing well, but I feel like I'm the only person who has really said, this isn't actually, and it doesn't feel like enough for me. And not to say that they're not doing real honest work, because they are, and I'm sure a lot of them are happy, but so many of the people that I have conversations with are not actually happy. And
Mm,
they never, it's like a would be nice to have, and it doesn't feel like a real tangible for them. Whereas I have always felt, in, I guess, for lack of a better term, like I felt ahead of Like I've always known about this matrix, and I was like, it doesn't feel like I belong here. And it was a level of delusion that I think that so many people, like no one believed in me when I was in my mid 20s. I was, in the depths of retail in the service industry, so miserable. But I kept telling people, I just know eventually I'm going to find a way to travel, and I could just see a certain lifestyle for myself. And I don't know why, like what it was for me, that I was so sure that it was something that was possible. I didn't know how I was going to do it, but I knew that I was going to pursue it. And I always knew that I was going to end up here. Even though, if you looked at the trajectory that I was on in my 20s, people, that's why they were laughing at me. They're like, well, there's no way that you're ever going to make that happen. And so many people that I know are in that position where they're complaining about a really toxic working environment. They're not happy. The career that they're in doesn't feel like something that they ever thought that they would be doing. They're not happy in, but they never do anything about it. And I feel like for me, it was just such an easy, I don't know what the point was for me, where I was like, I just know that this is not for me. Like I had to really get really, like, you have to kind of call yourself out on your own BS. But did you have that moment where you're like, I feel like I'm kind of, yeah, like this is something I'm really, really going to pursue, and I'm going to make it happen, and I'm going to break out from the matrix? And the second part of my question is, why do you think that most people don't ever break away from that, even though they're so unhappy? Because I think that it, for me anyways, I feel like it goes beyond fear of failure.
Mm. So I'll answer your second question first. I think people aren't unhappy enough.
Mm.
I don't think it's bad enough. And I'll explain. So for me, I was 26 and I was in a corporate job selling software, doing well, ticking all the boxes, doing everything that, the Australian dream. And I hated it. I hated it. And I'd hit a point the year before where I'd moved cities to a different branch that was struggling in the company I was with because I was doing well. And I thought, maybe that'll, new location, new challenge, turn that around. It was just worse. And it was an even more toxic work environment. And I just hated it. I hated work. I hated what I was doing. And again, it was everything. Like it was the Australian dream. And I didn't want to do that anymore. And I looked forward another 10 years and I thought, if this is what I'm still doing, that's going to suck so much. And I had a great group of friends, but the problem, and this is something I only learned about afterwards, I felt it, but I didn't understand it. And the problem with you trying to go through change is everyone has a version of who you are. So right now, if I were to go to my friends around here, they would, each of them have a version of who I am. And then you go to other places like my jiu-jitsu gym, my friends there, yeah, James is this. So everyone has a version of who you are. So when you try and change, you have all of these eyes on you and people are like, what are you doing? What do you mean? And when you evolve, when you change, and there's a big thing in Australia, tall poppy syndrome. Crabs in a bucket is another expression. So those that try and rise above, those that try and change, people just like, no, we're going to cut you back down. I didn't know how to break out of that mold. I didn't know how to be anyone else. And I just felt crippled by all of these versions of me, but didn't know what I wanted to be, but I knew I didn't want to be that. And
Mm-hmm.
my moment, I woke up, I was laying in bed and I didn't want to get out. And I thought, this sucks. Like this can't be it. And I rang my brother and I just said, hey, I'm going to quit today. He goes, good. And I said, I think I'm going to go overseas. He goes, cool. When? I said, I don't know, this week, maybe. And just for reference, from Australia, that's a big deal because it's 24 hours to
Yeah.
anywhere. And then he goes, cool, bring your dogs up. And I walked into the office that morning and I just said to the boss, I'm like, I'm out. I'm not going to do this anymore. And I've been with that company for 5 or 6 years. And they were not doing right by me in the end. It got really sketchy. It got really sketchy. Like they were stealing money from me and getting away with it. And it was not great. And then I lied and I said I was going to a competitor so they would finish me on the spot. And I went home and I rang my friend. I was like, hey, I just quit my job. I'm going to go overseas. Can I move my stuff into your garage? And he goes, when? I said, today, tomorrow? He goes, oh, yeah, all right, cool. So I moved my stuff into his garage and bought a ticket overseas. And the first place I went was Japan. Now, it wasn't meant to be a one-way ticket.
Mhm.
I bought a return ticket. And I remember that first day in Japan. So I got in late at night, and I'm a country kid. So public transport, all of that sort of stuff for me, I wasn't amazing with it. And I managed to land in Tokyo at like 11:30 at night or something like that, figure out all of the train stations, tram stops, all of that. And I got to the place that I was staying. And I got up the next morning, and I just remember I was sitting on the train in a complete different country where they didn't speak English. And I've been to Europe and done that sort of stuff before. And I just remember sitting there, and all of this weight was just lifted. Like
Mhm.
everything was lifted off. And I felt unstoppable. And I thought, this is the most free I've felt in years. And then I knew in that moment, I was like, this is not going to be a 2-week trip. And I had to go home for an event a few weeks later. And I'd already bought a ticket to go overseas before I got home. And then, yeah, I went to Central America for a good period of time. And I don't know if I've shared this story. I think I shared it on a session with Mike. And I was on a hike on a volcano. And sometimes you meet people along the way, and there's these glass shattering moments. And there was this guy, we were hiking a volcano, and there was a heap of us, we were chatting, and he was Australian. And he was talking about his trips. And I just said to him, I said, how long have you been traveling? And he said, 18 months, 2 years. And then there was just this moment of like, you can do that? You don't, you don't have, what? And he goes, yeah, of course you can do it. I didn't want to work for a little while. I'll go home when I have to go home. And there's just my brain ticking over of just everything that was naturally accepted as life in particularly Australia, because there is a one thing that you do. It's the school, the university, the job, the car, the house, the kids, the dogs, all of that sort of stuff. And everything was just getting unraveled. And again, it was another one of those moments of like, whoa, I can do anything that I
Mhm.
want. And yeah, that was the start. That was the start. And I met all of these people doing different things, working on different projects, working remote, and designers, salespeople, all of that sort of stuff. I met them, and actually broke my foot a week into that trip, and stayed in Guatemala with Mike for a few months.
Mhm.
And if you've ever spoken to Mike, even for an hour, you realize that a lot of the stuff he says is very paradigm shifting.
Mhm.
So that was the massive turn of me following this path, realizing it's not the way, but not knowing what else there was, and then just completely removing myself from a situation where everyone has expectations of me.
Mhm.
And I came back, and the biggest thing that I noticed is Mike said this to me. He said, what you'll notice when you get home is that you have grown, changed, evolved, and you're a completely different person. He said, all of your friends will be doing the same things, to having the same conversations, complaining about the same things in the same job that they hate. He said, that's not their fault. And you need to understand that you can't change that. You need to appreciate them for who they are. And it was right. You go away for a good period of time, you come home, and it's kind of a reflection of where you could have been.
Yeah, yeah, it really is so interesting to hear you have that moment because in all of my travels, I you meet a lot of people, right? On planes,
Mm,
airports, everywhere you meet a lot of people who are actually living a very similar life to you. And whenever I speak to other remote workers, they all almost always have like one moment that they were like, yeah, this is it. This I'm going to keep
yeah.
traveling. I think that this is the moment. Most recently, I met someone on a plane who's now he's from the States, but he's now living in Australia, and he had a very similar moment. He's like, I was just, in the middle of the ocean, and I was like, yeah, Texas isn't home for me. I'm just going to find a way to make this work. And so often I think that people are it's just such a foreign concept for people. Like, oh, I didn't realize that I could just build. For me, one of my biggest things is I'm a big believer in building a career around your life, not the other way around. And that's what we've been taught, so often. Like, well, no, like you fit in vacations and life around your career, but your career is like your thing that you do, and that's your identity and what you're most proud of. But so many people that I've met, my travels, they do have that one moment. I also had that moment where I was like, yeah, this is it. Like I'm doing it. And when I was in Mexico, I was like, I'm just gonna keep doing this. And so many people, so many of my friends were like, oh, wait, so you could just continue to travel? Like, what about work? What about your apartment? It's like all of those things I can do and figure out. It's not, so it's such a foreign concept for people. It's really mind blowing. But yeah, you do go home, and that's it for me, is that I feel like it really opens up your mind to opportunity and potential when you start traveling. And again, going back to the idea of like living life on your own terms, the more that you do those things, it really expands you in such a way that you didn't really think was possible. That when you go back, you're like, I've really outgrown this environment. I have. I'm just
Mm,
no, I just don't belong here anymore. And that is just a knowing that I know. I can't explain it to anyone because or people who are, back home, it's a really hard thing to explain to people because it's really personal. But whenever I go home, I'm like, this isn't it. I just don't
mm,
belong here. And it's not to, hurt anyone's feelings. They are my family and they're my friends, but I just really feel like I've outgrown that environment.
mm,
Once you start living this way, if it's authentic to who you are and how you want to live, it's really hard to go back. It's really challenging to
mm.
go back.
So just for it's funny how it evolves as well. So I don't live where I grew up. I'm uh, probably 24-hour drive away from there, and of course I miss my family. I'm going home next week to see them.
Mm,
But I knew that that state, I was in Victoria. I lived in a bunch of different places there, and whenever I would go away, I was not excited to go home. I didn't want to go home, and they served a purpose. But I hit a point again, another point where, and this is even during COVID in Australia where everything was locked down like crazy. I hit a point where it was just, I don't, I don't want to be here anymore. And I found this place during COVID, and so I live in a tropical paradise, and I'm not just saying that. It's called the Sunshine Coast. It is stunning, and I found this place, and and I didn't want to leave. And so I was dating a girl at the time, and this is where she grew up. We found it. So we came out here to escape what was happening in that state because it was crazy. And then after it was over, we went back down, and I didn't really want to leave. And I got back down to Melbourne, and I just thought, nah, this is not it. So I came back up, and I haven't left. And
mm,
this here, I was kind of I was on a teetering point where I don't know how ready I was to really put some roots down because I still wanted to go traveling. I wanted to go exploring, and I still do. Don't get me wrong, but I was really attached to the open idea for me of, sorry, really attached to the idea of open-ended trips. And the thing that I noticed is that as I did them, as time went past, because I love where I am, and I have a beautiful life, a beautiful home, and I have great friends. I have beaches, rainforests, hikes, everything that you could do. Like life is awesome. I noticed that I'd take these trips, and then I'd get to about the 4 week or 5 week mark, and I think, ooh, I want to go home. And then it got down to the 4 week, and then the 3 week, and then the 2 week, and it's not as soon as I expected it to be. But I realize I love being home. I love going away. But it's the 2 to 3 weeks that are the sweet spot for me. And it's funny how life changes, and it's gone from, because I've done a lot and I'm still not done. I will continue to do a lot of travel, but it gave me permission, I suppose, to step into the season of life now where it's like I want to work on things and build things that I really enjoy, knowing that because I don't have that. I want to do another 2 year open ended trip hanging over me now. It's kind of given me permission to, like, I've ticked that box. Now I'm going to move on to the next thing. And I see you absolutely loving being on the road, everything like that. And I think there's an appreciation because I know exactly what you're feeling. I know what that
mhm.
feeling's like of absolute freedom. And it's funny just how the seasons change, and maybe I'll go back to it. Maybe in another few years we'll be like, yeah, I want to go back on the road for a good while. But yeah, it's
It
funny how
does.
it happens.
It does evolve because even hearing you talk about that feeling of like you want to go home, I don't have that, but that's what I'm looking for. So
Mm,
I think even in just the 2 years, last year I was traveling so fast. You remember I was changing
Mm,
locations. Like it was crazy fast. I experienced actually travel burnout for sure by the time that I went home. But it was exhilarating and that was really what I wanted to do. I set out to do that from the beginning of last year. This year, I for sure wanted to travel a little bit slower. I wanted to move around often, but I definitely slowed down because I was really missing that stability almost and like being able to be somewhere long enough to create a routine. But what I'm really looking for in this is the evolution idea is that for me, the next step is really finding a place where I can actually see myself just staying there and staying put for maybe like 6 months. So 2 years ago, my goal, I was like, I just want to see as much of the world as possible. Was getting super, I was like, it was an obsession. I was really competitive with myself. Like I remember last year before I went home for Christmas, I was like, well, I've gone to 14 countries. Like, let's make it 15. Like, where else can I go before I go home? Like, it was a really weird, gamification of life. It was weird. And so this year, not as much, but I definitely do think that now my priorities are shifting to like where, can I find a little bit more of that stability? So, not to, your goals again, they're allowed to change, and the way that you want to live is allowed to
mm,
change. But I think it's just going back to I have that option. I don't have to stay put if I don't want to, and if I change my mind, then I change my mind. But most people just don't have that luxury. So but hearing you talk about wanting to go home, like that's something that I'm actually really like envious of, because I don't have that feeling. It's like I don't have a home base, but I innately really I crave that, and that's what I'm looking for. I just don't know where
mm,
that is yet. But that's the beauty of what I'm doing, is that I don't have that answer, but I know that I will. I'm going to find it, because the more
mm,
that I explore, the more that I do things, the more that I expose to other cultures and countries and cities, it's becoming a little bit more clear. Like I'm able to narrow down like my options to like, okay, well, I felt really happy here and I could see myself going back there. So
mm,
yeah, it's the evolution of goals for sure. I just
mm,
haven't, I don't know I don't think that it ever really ends either. Like it's always evolving. And then, maybe I will want to stay put. Maybe I don't. That's also either option is totally fine.
mm. And you know you can do it. But what are those places? Where are the places that you thought, yeah, I can come back?
Yeah, I surprisingly, I mean, when I was in Budapest last year, I was like, I'm going to come back here next year for sure. And I'm going to stay here for 6 months. It didn't work out because this year I was like, no, I feel like I'm not ready to be somewhere for more than like a month. Um, but I could see myself maybe being there for a few months, but I really am very attached, like emotionally connected to Spain and surprisingly Croatia. Like these countries that are very European in architecture, like old European architecture, those are the places that I'm like most drawn to. So we'll see. Maybe I'll end up there. But I was born in Spain, so I feel like that's why I have a connection there.
Spain's lovely. Spain's lovely. Croatia, that place was, I didn't expect it. I didn't expect it. Budapest was a lot of fun. Um, but it was beautiful, but I didn't feel like I spent enough time there to figure it out. Whereas Croatia, it was just everywhere you'd look was just, this is not real. This is
Yeah,
too
it's not
much.
real.
It's beautiful.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a different world for sure. It's very very different than how Canadians live for sure. It's so again, it's like okay, this actually feels like I could get used to this lifestyle. Like people just go and have a coffee in the middle of the afternoon for 3 hours. It's like you guys don't have jobs or anywhere to be. It's just a very slow way of life, and that's one of the first things that I was able to
Hmm.
definitely adopt is oh yeah, I'm just gonna my days are like slowing right down and just enjoying being in the present moment, things that I was never able to do. But yeah, I think that it's for me traveling. I usually know right away like how I feel about a place, and if I'm going to like it. It just goes. I have a really strong intuition. People are like, oh, give it a chance. If you don't like it, give it a shot. I don't need to because I just
I'm
have
yet to
really
be proven
developed.
wrong.
Yes, I
Yeah.
very much like I know my intuition. And when I landed in Budapest, it was nighttime. And stunning. Like Budapest lit up at night is one of my favorite memories. And I was like, I am obsessed with the city. I love the city. I could see myself being here for a few months. And I knew that right away, right away. So yeah, it's a really, again, it's just a personal experience. You know, people look for different things in different cities when they travel, but yeah, those are the ones that kind of stick out to me. So who
Mm,
knows? Maybe next year will be the year that I stay there for a little bit.
mm. So what you said about the slow place. So this where I live now. So if you go up within a 2 hour drive, you have the Gold Coast, then you have Brisbane, then you have the Sunshine Coast. Now the Gold Coast is just party party. Uh, you kind of go there. A lot of young people trying to figure themselves out, and a lot of people that never really grew up per se. You know, like your 40, 50 year olds
Mhm.
still going to clubs and that sort of stuff. That's kind of that vibe. You know, some people have referred to it as like plastic fantastic and all of that sort of stuff. Like if that gives you the vibe, and
Yeah,
then Brisbane is it's a city. It's a
yeah.
city. It's not that great. And then the Sunshine Coast, when I say to most people I live there, if people are down south in the colder states, they're like, oh, that must be nice. But then the people up here that kind of know it, they're like, no, 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 that's way too slow for me. That is exactly what I look for. I like how quiet it is. I like how not too much happens. And it's funny, I go to jiu-jitsu in the middle of the day, and we'll have people that'll come to the gym and they're on holidays from, you know, some of the southern states, and they'll come to a lunchtime class, and it's just packed. There's people everywhere. And they're like, how do so many people have time off in the middle of the day? Like, do you guys work? Yeah, but you know, it's a pretty relaxed place.
Hmm.
That's the vibe here. Super
Yeah,
slow, super relaxing.
I love
And I think
it.
that's why I like it so much.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, listen, I very much used to subscribe. I still really love big cities. I will say I love the hustle and bustle of being around a ton of energy. I'm naturally, I think, more extroverted than I am introverted. I feel like I'm an introvert, but um, I love talking and being around a lot of people. But as I've gotten older, I will say I really love the just again, just being able to not do anything or like have anywhere to be in the middle of the day or not feel rushed. I feel like everyone is so rushed in Canada. Like you're rushing in the morning to get ready for work, you're, stuck in traffic, you're like then rushing to get to work and everything is just so rushed. So being able to slow down and really appreciate slow moments, that to me was really something that I do not take for granted. I literally, I'm currently in Malaysia and um let me just say it's really forced me to slow down because there hasn't been like a ton for me to do. And I just go back to the idea of I'm just so grateful that I even have the ability to just slow down and just appreciate being able to sit at a park for 2 hours, even though I'm quote unquote bored. I wouldn't be able to do that. Like 4 years ago, I would have been, rushing back to the floor and only having like 30-minute lunch break, right? So it's just being able to slow down. But I like having the option of being close to a really big city, but I do love the aspect of being able to sit and do nothing is like one of my favorite things I have learned.
Hmm.
I have since learned it's one of my favorite things to do. Just sit there and people watch and just do absolutely nothing with my
Yeah.
time and like not be in a rush. It's one of life's purest luxuries in my opinion.
Mm. People watching is a sport that I also
Yeah.
subscribe to. It's a lot of
It's
fun.
so fun. It's so
Yeah.
fun. Yeah. Do you come up with like stories for people or
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. If I'm sitting there with a friend that's also creative, you'll have two people talking, and then just like you'll play the character of one of the people. But this is probably pretty messed up to say, but one thing that always just completely grabs my attention is when a couple have a fight in public.
I love it.
And there's something about it, just watching people kick off, it just grabs my attention. And I remember in Dubrovnik, this is years ago, there was a couple having a fight. Now, I don't know what language they were speaking, but she was mad. And I was standing there with some friends and we're just watching what was happening. Just, it was wild. They were going so hard. And then she slapped him in public and walked away. Now, not many people will stop when a couple are yelling, but when someone slaps another person in public, the whole, like the very, very touristy area, everyone just stopped and looked. That was probably one of the most intense public arguments I've ever seen.
Yeah, that's a little
Yeah.
intense. I know. And then you kind of wonder, like, I wonder whose
Mm.
side I'm on. Like, whose side am I on right now? Like, who's right and who's wrong? Like,
Mm.
you just want to know who did what, and like, I want to know, like, who am I rooting for? You know, it's fascinating. It's definitely a sport. And then just to see how people act when they don't think that anyone is watching is also oddly
Mm.
fascinating. I mean,
Mm.
I don't have to stare at you, but now I am, because you're being so wildly inappropriate by yourself. So it's just, yeah, it's a really, just being able to do stuff like that is, yeah, it's a gift. It really is a gift,
Mm.
you know?
Mm. Uh, Changing gears for a second. Mexico. Where did you start and where did you stay?
Where did I start? So I'm flying from, so I when I was living in Canada still, I was renting an apartment in Hamilton, and there was a really cheap like a budget airline called Swoop. They've since gone out of business because they were a little too budget, if you know what I mean. But they were able to fly from there to Playa del Carmen for super super cheap. So I always would fly into Playa because you've been there. It's really easy to kind of like take a bus and whatever, so I would always go to Playa. So I did that. The last time I was there, so I did Playa for a few weeks. And then I went to Tulum right after for a month. I did Merida for another month. And then I did Puebla and Mexico City. And then I came home. So yeah, I did like a little bit of, I guess my goal initially was to kind of start in Playa and then work my way up.
Mm.
But then I kind of stopped at Mexico City. But I hear that, there's a lot of other beautiful places for me to explore
Mm.
in Mexico City. So I do eventually want to go back. I don't know. I'm a little apprehensive to go back to the same country more than once, because I just feel like now I'm like really competitive. I'm like, I just want to go to more countries and see more countries. But yeah, those are the places that I did initially.
Mm. Mm. Mexico is one of those places. So I spent maybe a month there. So not
Hmm.
too long. It's one of those places where you'll have people that are starting a 6 to 12 month trip and then they planned on being there for a couple of weeks and 6 months later they're still there because there's
Yeah.
so much that you can do.
Yeah, and also I believe, I haven't looked into it, but I think that they're like handing out visas now, like
Mm.
handy. So I think that a lot of people, it's easy to be there for a little bit longer. And I think that it's nice for anyone that's looking to potentially become a digital nomad. It's a really easy place to start, right? Because it's an
It's
easy
so
flight.
cheap.
Yeah, so cheap. It's an easy place. Like, let's say you're Canadian, like I said, it's direct, like it's 5 hours to get from Toronto basically to Playa. A lot of expats, right? A lot of digital nomads are there. So it's pretty easy to like make friends and integrate. The weather is obviously great. You have a little bit of everything. So I think that it's a good place to start if people are looking to explore becoming a nomad. I always recommend that people do almost like a trial run, like just pick somewhere and just be there for 3 to 4 months, see how you like it, and then that that trial period, that's certainly what happened for me. I was like, I'm just going to give myself a little trial period, go to Mexico
Mm.
for the winter, and then that usually will extend to
Oh, you
maybe
get
6
proper
months.
Canadian winters, don't you?
Proper Canadian winters. It's getting a little bit better, I feel like now, but they're not enjoyable by any means. It's
Mm.
very, very rigid cold. Yeah. So,
Mm.
yeah, I would just tell people, just start off with a little trial period, see how you like it, see if you're able to find a good groove routine, if you're able to find a way to, balance your finances and schedule and whatever. And then usually that extends to, 6 months, a year, in my case 2 years. Who knows? You know who knows, but I feel like Mexico is a good place to start, I would say.
Mm. Mm. So if you were to give a bit of advice to someone adding on to that, they were looking at their finances, they were looking at that jumping point at the beginning. Is there anything that you found helpful or anything you would say?
Not really. I mean, listen, when it comes to finances, I'm probably one of the probably worst people to talk to, because I very much live like I have somebody else's bank account. I'm like, I don't know whose money I'm spending, but it's not mine. But I would say what I did is really I hired someone to kind of help me with my finances. So no matter what, I have a certain money set aside every single month. So I know at least I'm being responsible in some capacity. I know that that's kind of taken care of. And I think just being able to know what is because people always, you hear a lot of people telling you, well, make sure that you have all of your living expenses taken care of. But that's going to vary, I think, from person to person. Some people are okay living and staying in hostels. I'm personally not someone, I'm not one of those people. So my living expenses might look a little bit different. So kind of figuring out what that looks like for you. And then just being really ready for incidentals. Like, encountered a couple of hiccups here. If I wasn't prepared for that financially, it probably would have been a little bit of a problem. So yeah, I just think knowing what your basic living expenses, like how much you need to be bringing in to make that, to continue to live that way, and then having some room for emergencies, and then always making sure, for me anyways, it was still really important to make sure that I was, putting money aside, just because,
Mm.
it's not free money. Like, I still wanted to make sure that I had money set aside that was still working for me. So those are probably some of the top things. I don't know if that you would add anything else, because again, I'm not the most
Mm.
financially responsible person.
So, adding into the hostels conversation, if you are backpacking and traveling for the sake of traveling, 100% stay in hostels. You meet people that are on the same journey. It's so much fun. But if you're working remote and you're
Yeah.
going to be taking a good amount of calls per day, you need to stay somewhere that you have access to quiet. But more importantly, make sure you check the internet connection
Hmm.
and actually get them to verify it before you go, because there's nothing more stressful than getting somewhere and realizing that the internet doesn't work and you've got calls
Hmm.
the next morning. That is exhausting.
Yeah.
Um, but as for money, I'm pretty good with money. I am. I always make sure that I have reserves there, and I'm not a penny pincher, as in I track every single dollar. But I always just make sure that I have money invested, money that's earning something for me, as well as money ready to go should I need it. Uh, that doesn't mean that you don't get surprises and that sort of thing. Like you said, money for incidentals. But no, I've always been pretty on top of it. But how did you find someone to help you manage that?
So funny enough, when I was in Mexico, when I was in Merida, I was getting my nails done. Again, just my lifestyle. I was getting my nails done, and I struck up a conversation with a girl beside me, lady beside me, because she was speaking English. And turns out she's also from Toronto, and her and I have the exact same life. She was at the time traveling Mexico, and she is a coach. And yeah, we had done the exact same itinerary, but like 2 or 3 weeks apart. So anyways, we just got to talking, and we just stayed in touch. We became really good friends, actually. And we were having a similar conversation a few months after. And then, yeah, she said, well, if you ever want someone to kind of help you with that, this is the guy that I use. And he works, obviously, he's Canadian, so he could definitely help you. So it actually came through a referral. And so when
Mm,
I had my meeting with him, he was like, are you interviewing or meeting with anybody else? I'm like, listen, like, you were referred to me, so I trust you. And it was a very minimal research, I'll be honest.
hmm.
Because I just trusted that, you know, I just trusted her because I met her. And we just became friends. So I didn't think that she was going to lead me down that path, if you will.
That's funny. I actually met my accountant through someone in a cafe in Mexico. So I was in Mexico. Like, I don't even know where I was, and I was chatting to someone, as I always do. And then he was American, and being Australian, people want to introduce you to the other Australians. He goes, yeah, there's this fella in town that this other Aussie, and had that guy happened to walk in. So he connected us, and this guy was an accountant, but he wasn't Australian based. He was US based. So he was Australian. His wife was American, and they were staying over there because they wanted to kind of get out of here with everything going on. And and I said to him, because at the time my accountant had just gone to prison for embezzlement, so I realized that my tax hadn't been done properly, and it was a little bit unsure. And he was an accountant. And I just said, funny timing. This just happened with my accountant. He goes, do you need a new one? I said, yeah. And he said, well, I know a guy. His name is Tim. Do you want me to connect you? And I said, yeah, sure. And I connected with Tim, and what was that, 2.5, 3 years ago, whenever it was. He he is so good I mean, so unbelievably good. Out of hours, he'll answer questions, and everything is done in so much in advance. So whilst I said before, yes, I have my tax, or not tax, my money pretty well sorted, I do have that trusted advisor of, hey, I'm thinking about doing this, maybe this with this company. This is what we're trying to do. What are the risks and everything like that? And he's also a lawyer as well, so he runs his own accountancy firm as well as works in a law firm. So he knows absolutely everything. And if I give one piece of advice, don't go to your mate as an accountant.
Yeah.
Go to someone that you speak to them and you're like, oh, you're a super accountant. And if even if they're not prepared to push the limits or anything like that, that's a good thing. Because I've been in a position in the past where in Australia they did this thing where the government introduced, it wasn't an AI, they called it robo-debt or something like that, where this bot or whatever it was picked up people that owed the government money, and it was like it screwed everything up. And then I had the Australian tax office chasing me for money that I hadn't taken. And it was ended up in a big class action. It was really, really messy. And I didn't have a good accountant at the time. And I remember trying to chase everything, all of this information. And they're at me, you need to get this to us. I'm like, I don't have it. And on the back of that, that's when I realized I need to have that support mechanism and that system in place. And in the end, like I had to do months of running around. They're like, oh yeah, our mistake, never mind. All of that for this. But yeah, having a good financial advisor is really important.
Yeah, 100. And I also think that this is something that really came to the forefront of my mind when I entered sales, is that truly I was very much like I was doing okay. I've never, been in like a tough spot. But working again in retail, it's not like it pays you a ton. It was a lot. I just wasn't able to necessarily get ahead as much as I would have wanted to in my 20s. And so for me, sales, I viewed it as a vehicle for me to accelerate some of my financial goals and almost play catch up, because it really did, it helped me shrink the timeline to some of my financial goals. Like you started making, like really decent money, really well, not really quickly. It took me a while, but when I started making that, I was like, okay, I need to find a way to really make sure now that I can have this duplicate, right? Because
Mm.
I was playing catch up for what I wish I would have been able to do in my 20s. So yeah, I started having conversations around like, what should I be doing? Like, what should I be looking for? And then this lady that I met in Mexico, she's like in her 50s. So she's also much wiser than I am. I'm quite wise, but she's a little bit wiser than me. And she said, this is what I would recommend that you do, especially as a Canadian. So yeah, I think that having someone just to help you, because it's just not something I really care to learn either. It's not, some people really have an affinity for it and learning this stuff, and they're really good at this kind of stuff. It's just never really been my forte, so I would rather just outsource an expert to help me with that for sure.
100%. 100%. Well, I think that's a good spot to wrap up. This has been fun. I've enjoyed it. And one of many conversations that we have. But thanks for hopping on and sharing. And I'm keen to hear where you go next.
I know. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, I'll talk to you soon.